It was June 22, 1876, when we broke camp near the junction of the Yellowstone River and Rosebud Creek. The air was dry and tense. General Custer, riding high on confidence, parted ways with General Terry and took the 7th Cavalry up the Rosebud. His intention was clear: track down Sitting Bull and his people and force a decisive confrontation. There were no wagons in our column, everything we needed had to be packed on mules. About 150 of them, stubborn as the day is long. We did the packing ourselves. That afternoon, we rode hard, pushing along the creek until dusk. The next morning, we were in the saddle again by first light, covering rough ground well into the evening. The 24th brought more of the same. But that day we caught wind of something: tracks, sign, a trail. The evidence of a large movement of Indians ahead of us was growing with every mile. That night, near the headwaters of the Rosebud, we stopped for a few hours. Somewhere between midnight and 1 in the morning, orders came down: saddle up, and keep it quiet. The darkness was thick, you could barely make out the man in front of you. I followed the clatter of kettles swinging from the pack of the man ahead. It was that or get separated. We moved like shadows until the first hint of light touched the sky. On the 25th, we moved again. My unit, B Troop, under Captain McDougall, was up front. We rode until we were within 10 miles or so of the Indian encampment. Then, the bugle called the officers together. Custer made his final dispositions here. He split the command into 4 parts: 5 companies would go with him, 3 under Reno, 3 more with Benteen, and 1 held back as the rear guard. That was us, B Troop. Before we moved out again, 10 men from each company were pulled to manage the pack train. I was one of the 10 from B. Since we had been in the lead earlier, our mules stayed near the front of the train. Custer led his group off at a sharp clip, Reno and Benteen following their own paths. The plan, so far as I understood it, was to attack the village from multiple sides. Reno was to strike from the south, crossing the river to draw the Indians' attention. Custer's 5 companies would circle further west and, presumably, hit the other side. We kept moving forward, passing a lone teepee with a dead warrior inside. Shortly afterward, we started hearing gunfire in the distance. Then we met a Crow scout. He was rattled, but managed to gesture and mumble, "Many soldiers down." He couldn't speak much English, but his message was plain. That scout was likely Curly, one of Custer's guides, and the only Crow moving alone at that point. Not long after, we ran into a white soldier from Custer's detachment. He had been sent to carry a message to Reno before the fight had truly begun. Judging by what he didn't say, Custer hadn't yet engaged the enemy when he was dispatched. He may well have been Daniel Kanipe, sent with orders that came too late to change much of anything. From our position, we could now see the Indian camp spread out in the valley below. It was a striking sight, teepees scattered across the green floor, peaceful at a distance. But the stillness was a lie. We soon spotted Reno's men pulling back, heading uphill, clearly under pressure. I made my way over to a fellow from G Troop, McGonigal, if memory serves, and asked him what had happened. His face was pale. He told me Reno had charged in and been driven back with heavy losses. Lieutenant McIntosh had been killed. Hodgson was unaccounted for. Even the doctor, trying to make it to the high ground, had caught a bullet before reaching safety. He was the first dead man I saw that day. Not long after, Benteen arrived with his 3 companies. The pack train came in behind, along with our own B Troop. Once the column had reassembled, a lieutenant from a troop, Varnum, I believe, took a detail that included Sergeant Criswell, 2 others, and myself. Our mission was to locate Hodgson. We were halfway down the slope when a courier brought us back. New orders. D Troop was preparing to push toward where Custer was thought to be. That didn't last. D Troop came back in a hurry, faster than they'd gone out. Something had changed. Command must have realized we were surrounded. The decision was made to shift eastward about half a mile and take up a more defensible position. The spot we settled on was well chosen. We were perched near the hill's edge, with open ground in all directions except toward the river. That meant few hiding places for enemy warriors, and there was a natural dip in the land behind us where the animals could be kept somewhat sheltered. Just as we were getting our line set, the firing began. It came on fast and kept up until sundown. At one point near dark, we heard taps being played, not from our side. It was likely a trick, an Indian ruse to make us think Custer was still out there and nearby. When we later found the body of Custer's bugler, Henry Voss, he was a mile away from the rest. Stripped, on his knees, with arrows planted in his back. That sound had been his last deception, not ours. The 26th came with blood-red dawn and opened with a storm of bullets. The fighting was worse than the day before, closer, angrier, desperate. It raged until midday. At that point, we noticed the enemy fire slackening. Some of us figured the Indians were running short on ammunition. Then the wounded started crying out for water. The sun was unforgiving. About a dozen of us volunteered to go. The river was downhill, past a ravine that offered some cover. But at the bottom was a stretch of open ground, 20 feet or so, where any movement made you a target. We couldn't afford to get pinned. Each of us carried as many canteens as we could manage. The trouble was, it took time to fill them, and time was a luxury we didn't have. One man had the good sense to bring a large camp kettle. I took it, waded into the stream, filled it quickly, then ran back to shelter where we could fill the canteens in relative safety. Michael Madden wasn't so lucky. He tried to fill a canteen at the river's edge and caught a bullet in the leg. They had to take the limb the next day. Dr. Porter, our only surviving physician, did the operation. The other doctor had been killed earlier, as I mentioned. By late afternoon, the pressure lifted. The Indians began to pull back. We didn't pursue. We watered the horses for the first time since the morning of the 25th and ate our first real food, bacon, coffee, and hardtack. I'll never forget how good it tasted. On the 27th, new orders came. Some of us were sent back over Reno's battlefield to recover the fallen. I was with Sergeant Criswell again, and 3 others. We finally found Lieutenant Hodgson. He was lying by the riverbank, maybe 20 feet from the water. His body was stripped. He'd been shot in the head and groin. Nearby were several others from G Troop, including their first sergeant, Edward Botzer. We lifted Hodgson's body onto our carbines and carried him up the hill. Wrapped him in a blanket and buried him there. We planted a sapling to mark the spot. That was our way. Still, at that point, we didn't know what had happened to Custer. We assumed he was alive, maybe still maneuvering, maybe cut off. It wasn't until midday that dust appeared on the western horizon. At first, we feared another Indian assault. But it was General Terry's column. And with them came the awful truth: Custer and every man with him had been killed. The next morning, we walked that field. I won't describe it in detail. It was gruesome. Dozens of our comrades, some hardly recognizable. We did what we could. Buried them where they fell. Covered their bodies with earth and prayers. Later, we passed through what had been the Indian village. Most of it was gone, but 2 teepees remained. Inside were the dead. Stacked high, like firewood. One body looked white to me, pale legs, but I never saw the face. No time to look closer. From there, we got to work making stretchers. We skinned horses and mules for their hides and used saplings to construct litters. That evening, we loaded the wounded, close to 50 men, and made our way to the mouth of the Little Bighorn, where the steamer Far West waited. The wounded were shipped downriver to Fort Abraham Lincoln. The rest of us continued downstream, eventually crossing the Yellowstone at Fort Pease, where we resupplied and drew new clothes and rations. A few days later, we encountered General Crook's column. Buffalo Bill Cody was with him. The two commands moved as one for a short time, until we confirmed the hostiles had scattered, some disappearing into Canada. The 7th Cavalry turned toward the mouth of the Tongue River and camped for nearly 3 weeks. There was one final task, a short march downriver to Standing Rock, where we seized a herd of ponies from the Indians and drove them back to Fort Lincoln. And that was the end of it. The end of the Little Bighorn for us.